y'all, how are you today? Hope you're having the best day. My name is Ashley Lynn, and here on my channel I like to talk about true crime, paranormal, conspiracy theories. So if you're interested in any of that, just hit that subscribe button, and if not, let's just hang out. So today we're going to start with a personal story of mine, a popular story about a sanatorium. So let's start by talking about tuberculosis itself and what was it? Well, tuberculosis was called TB for short, and it was mainly a disease of the lungs. It would affect the lungs. They did call it the White Plague. It did kill lots of people during the time that it was spreading. It was very contagious. It was quick spreading, and like I said, it did affect mostly the lungs. Symptoms usually for people with TB would be cough, fever, weight loss, chills, chest pain. Like I said, it is very contagious, and it would be spread like when a person sneezes or coughs into the air, or it gets onto someone, or people with a weakened immune system were more likely to catch TB. It was easier for the infection to spread to people with a weaker immune system. Okay, so let's talk about some of the treatments for TB. Separation was a big one. They assumed that if you kept people separated, it wouldn't spread as quickly. There was fresh air. They really did think that people who got plenty of fresh air, it would help. There was also high morality, so thinking positive. You know, if you put positive out, you're going to receive positive, and just being positive about the situation, I'm sure was not easy for people, but they did think that it would help a lot if people were staying positive. The doctors a lot of times would recommend bed rest for their tuberculosis patients. A healthy nutrition and diet was also another. I wouldn't necessarily call it a treatment, but, you know, they did think that it would help if you ate healthy, you were outside, you had a high positive morality. And when people couldn't go outside, like, they would even have sun lamps that were used to help, you know, give the patients, I guess, UV rays. Now, they did do some surgical treatments. There were some surgical treatments that they would perform. They would perform a pneumothorax, which is where they would collapse one of the affected lungs, and they would say it was to rest it, and then they would allow the lesions to heal, which a lot of times that did not work, and it just didn't work for some patients. And in 1943, an antibiotic was discovered and was given to the very first patient in November of 1949, and that patient was said to be cured. So in 1949, there was an antibiotic that would cure the disease. But before then, they had to resort to the other types of treatments in hopes that it would help. So let's talk a little bit about Waverly Hills. So Waverly Hills is, like I said, a sanatorium that's located in Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky. It sits high on top of a hill. It is a very, very large place. It did not start out, though, very big. It is also said to be one of the most haunted places in the world. There have been shows on Waverly Hills. I think that the current owners are actually, they offer tours around Halloween where you can pay and you can go tour the facility. So a little bit on the history of Waverly Hills. The land belonged to Thomas Hayes in 1883. He built a one-room school for his daughters to attend. His daughter decided to name the school Waverly School after one of her favorite Walter Scott authors and his Waverly novels. The Board of Tuberculosis bought the land and kept the name for the hospital. In the 1900s, Jefferson County was dealing with a huge outbreak of tuberculosis. They did believe it was because of the Ohio River being so close. So because the Hospital of Tuberculosis bought the land, they did build a 2-story structure. It was to house about 20 patients. So in 1912, the 2-story facility had been built and was full. So the patients that were coming from the hospital, they had to put up a temporary tent to house the extra patients that were coming from the hospital. The hospitals were, I guess, being overwhelmed with all the cases of tuberculosis. And in 1914, the Children's Pavilion opened. The pavilion was not only for the sick children, which was interesting, but they would also put the children of the sick parents who didn't have anyone to care for their children. If they had sick parents, they would put the unaffected children in with the sick children because they didn't have anywhere else for their children to go, and their parents were being put in this hospital. So they had to bring the not sick children and put them with the sick children in the Children's Pavilion. And like I said, this happened in the Children's Pavilion was built in 1914. So due to all the cases that Waverly Hills was receiving, they knew that it would not be able to be sustained for much longer if they didn't start building a bigger structure to house more patients. So in March of 1924, the building started for a more larger structure and a more efficient structure that would house, lots more patients. So this was when they started to build a 5-story structure that would house around 400 patients. They'd be more equipped to handle the outbreak that was happening. I would assume it was getting pretty bad at this point. Now, finally, it was built. The finished building was officially opened October 20th of 1926. Now, because tuberculosis was so contagious, the hospital knew that they would have to be self-sustained. You couldn't have a whole bunch of people coming in, going out. With that being said, they had to be self-sufficient. They had their own farm life, their own cattle. They had their own zip code. They had their own post office. Doctors and nurses actually lived on the premises in little houses around the hospital. They had to grow their own food. They had to do everything for themselves because, like I said, you don't want a whole lot of people coming in. You don't want a whole lot of people getting sick. So they tried to avoid that by being self-sustained. Okay, so my favorite part. Let's talk about a tunnel that was built on the property. They called this the Death Chute or the Death Tunnel. It was a long 500-foot tunnel that went from the first floor of the building and it went to the bottom of the hill down to the train tracks. They said it was for transporting supplies to the hospital. One side of it was steps where it would go all the way up, and the other side was a flat concrete slide almost. I mean, I hate to call it a slide, but it's what it was. The reason that was there, though, was also because they had to have a way of getting the deceased out of the building and at the bottom of the hill where the hearses would come and pick up the deceased. Now, going back to the treatments, right, we had to have a high morale, and the patients would be distraught or upset if they seen as many dead bodies that was coming out of the place as there was happening. So I think that the death tunnel was a way of avoiding people being upset, and they would send the bodies down this chute. And like I said, at the end of the tunnel, at the bottom of the hill, the hearses would come and pick up the bodies and take them to the funeral home or however. The interesting thing was that Waverly Hills was considered the most modern facility for its time. They had a big kitchen, like I said, they had the Children's Pavilion, they had their own everything. It was top of the line at the time. Waverly Hills had its run, and due to finding an antibiotic for tuberculosis, Waverly Hills was closed in 1961. Now, this is hearsay. It was said that over 50,000 people died at Waverly. However, due to record recording that was not very organized, it seems to be a little exaggerated, I think. In my personal opinion, I would say probably 20,000, but that's really high. There was actual no record, like I said, because they didn't really keep records like that. Then it was a different time. They didn't really organize or, keep records like they should have. After tuberculosis was closed, the building was quarantined and renovated and reopened in 1962 as Woodhaven Geriatric Center, which was a nursing home, where you would send your elderly if they couldn't be cared for. Now, Woodhaven had a bad rap. It was said that it was overcrowded. They didn't have enough staff. Staff neglected patients. It was awful living conditions, kind of nasty. They didn't get fed properly. It wasn't that great of a center. And Louisville's a pretty big area, so I can imagine the overcrowding was probably pretty bad. Because Waverly sat so long, it did become home to squatters and the homeless. The property was bought in 2001 by Charlie Mattingly, who began to restore and repair Waverly to its original glory. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the ghosts of Waverly. There is said to be a ghost named Timmy, who is a young boy who has been reported to play catch with some of the visitors. Some visitors have reported seeing a ball roll out into the hallway and, roll out of the side. Or there's actually been some reports of that ball being on one floor of the hospital, and then visitors will go around or go down and they will see that ball on a whole nother floor. When no one had brought it down or wherever. So that's pretty cool. I find that interesting. There is YouTube videos that people have recorded about Timmy. So if you're interested, definitely check those out. A lot of people have said to have smelled fresh baked bread that's been reported coming from the kitchen, even though the kitchen has not been used since the 80s. I find that so interesting. Visitors have smelled bread, or have actually seen a doctor that walks around the halls. A lot of times you can catch him in the cafeteria or near the cafeteria. I believe it's a doctor. They just say he has a white coat on, so I assume, he's probably a doctor. Or now, these are just rumors. I've heard personally the rumor that there was a nurse who was found dead in room 502 on the 5th floor. It's said to have been that she had got pregnant by a doctor on site who was actually married, and she was not married. And it said that she hung herself in her room due to, being pregnant and out of wedlock. And, that was frowned upon then. Like, it's not like today where, more power to you if you're a single mom and you're doing it, on your own. But it was a different time around this time, so that was super frowned upon and not cool. So, and there's also another nurse who, in 1932, had jumped to her death from the 5th floor as well. No one seems to know why, but some have speculated that she had been pushed. But like I said, because of bad record keeping, there are no records on this at all. This is just another rumor, he said, she said kind of deal. Another cool sighting is of a hearse that actually comes to the bottom of the hill to pick up the bodies. I think that's super scary. And there has also been sightings on the 3rd floor of which is where the children's wing was, of a little girl who has been seen in the windows without eyes, or she's just been sighted on the 3rd floor and she doesn't have any eyes. Some visitors have said that they have seen a woman bleeding with bleeding wrist asking for help, which is so sad. I can't even imagine. That was probably really scary. Now, people has also reported seeing shadows and hearing voices, and have had things thrown at them. People have said that they've seen doppelgangers. These are just some of the visitors and what things people had to say on YouTube. Like I said, if you're interested in any of the ghosts from Waverly, definitely go to YouTube and check that out. That's pretty cool. And like I said, I believe there are some shows that have been made on Waverly, like ghost shows. You can see if that's on Google, see if you can look it up. It's pretty cool. I would definitely look into it. I'd like to tell my personal story on this. I'm actually from Louisville. I was born in 1992, and I lived there for 10 years or so. My grandparents on my father's side actually met at Waverly Hills. My grandmother was a switchboard operator. She worked there for, I think, about 2 years, or a year or 2 years. And my grandpa was a patient. Going back to what was said about the treatments, my grandpa actually did have a surgery where they removed one of his lungs, hoping that it would help. It did not. He said that was the worst pain he's ever felt. My grandmother also had relationships with some of the patients there. Her and my grandpa, like I said, met there, fell in love. They had a lot of really interesting stories about Waverly. My grandpa doesn't have too fond memories of Waverly. I think he didn't have quite the best outlook on it, but, you know, he did his best. And he did make it out alive, and I'm grateful for that. Sure as heck, I am grateful for that. But they met there, and they didn't tell us, about me and my sister, about Waverly until we were a little bit older. And they never told my dad, and I'll tell you my dad's story from his experience. He used to ride dirt bikes all the time. That was his favorite thing to do. Well, you know, being in the city, there wasn't a whole lot of places to ride it. So he and his friend had told him about this place that they ride. It's up this big, huge hill. And he said that he remembers his friend not being able to ride one day, so he went by himself, and he just remembers riding up this hill, but he had no idea what was at the top. So he's riding up this hill, and boom, he comes out of the woods in this clearing, and there's this huge 5-story building that is massive. He said, though, that it was the most eerie thing he's ever experienced. He said that it just feels scary up there. The air is different. He said it was really terrifying up there, and he got out of there as quick as he could. Now, we would go back and visit my grandparents after we moved to North Carolina when I was 10, and we would go visit every Christmas and things like that. And I'll tell you my personal story. I would say it was 2 years after we moved to North Carolina that we went and visited, and that's when my dad and my grandparents told us about Waverly. And my sister, she was probably 17 at the time. I think I was 12 at the time. And they told us about the story of Waverly, and we were like, wow, we got to go see this. So my grandparents were like, well, y'all want to go see it? We'll drive. So it was me, my sister, and my cousin, and then my grandparents, and they drove us to the bottom of the hill. And they were like, okay, you know, it's right up there, you guys. Just be careful. I don't think you're supposed to be up there. But, so we're like, y'all ain't coming. And they were like, no, we're never going back up there. So they sat at the bottom of the hill waiting on us. I don't remember vivid details, except for when I got up there. I'm sure that was a really hard terrain, that hill. I do remember it was very, very steep. Very steep. And I just remember being at the top, at the tree line where the woods were. And as soon as we got up there, my sister and my cousin thought it would be funny to leave me. They take off running back down the hill. And here's little old me up there in shock. And I just remember stopping and hearing the door slamming. And I believe it was the tunnel doors. I'm not 100% sure. But it was loud, and it was like a consistent banging. And I just look up at the building, and I just see a shadow walk by the window. I was like, oh no. So I turn around and I take off. And I tell you that I would probably got down that hill in half the time it took me to walk up it. I was flying. I was terrified. And we get down and we're like catching our breath and we're like, and I'm like not even upset that they left me as I should be. I'm more upset that I was like in shock of what I saw and what I heard. And I just remember telling my grandparents there was something up there. It did not feel good. It just there's like this feeling of the air. I knew exactly what my dad was talking about when he said there's just this eerie feeling up there. It's not like anything I've ever experienced. It was really, really wild. So, pretty cool little story. Waverly, like I said, is still there. You can look it up. They're taking good care of the place. You know, they're trying to save it. It should be a historical monument or place. It should be. I'm not sure if it is, but if you do find out, let me know in the comments. But they are taking good care of it, and I do believe they're still doing tours. Sometimes they do year-round tours, I think, and sometimes it's just around Halloween. So if you're ever in Kentucky, please stop by Waverly Hills and check it out. It's really cool. Thank you guys for being here with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And come on back and see me next time, okay? We're going to have a super awesome story on another local. This is a true crime, so this is a murder. Unfortunately, it is local to me. It's actually very close. So check back in with me, okay? I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.